Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Instant Deck Tech. So, as you know, Monday means it's Modern Monday here in Instant Deck Tech land, and we have a super spicy list to check out today. So, this is Hardened Constrictor, originally by Brian DeMars, I believe on Channel Fireball. However, it was a Magic Online user by the name of the Mata that recently took it to a 5-0 finish in a competitive Modern League, so congrats to the Mata on their finish with the deck. A quick reminder before we break down the deck. If you enjoy this deck and you want to see it made into videos, take a minute, click the like button, the subscribe button, leave a comment, anything you can do to support your deck, because whichever deck is most popular gets a shot at being made into videos next week. So Hardened Constrictor is built around Winding Constrictor, and you probably know what this one does. It's super popular in Standard. Basically, for a black and a green, you get a 2/3 body, which is already pretty reasonable. I mean, it's not above the curve by any means, but it's a reasonable body, and whenever a counter goes on your stuff, you get an extra counter. One of the things that makes Winding Constrictor so scary in Modern is we have a lot of redundancy with this effect. So not only do we have Winding Constrictor, but we also have Hardened Scales, which is the other namesake card. So with Hardened Scales, it's essentially a 1-mana Winding Constrictor. You don't get the body, but if a counter goes on one of your creatures, you get an extra one of those counters. So this is kind of the plan of the deck. On turn 1, hopefully you Hardened Scales. On turn 2, hopefully you Winding Constrictor, and then you play a whole bunch of counter synergies. Two of the biggest ones are Hangerback Walker and Walking Ballista. They might look the same as double X artifacts, but they actually play out kind of differently. So Hangerback can just get super huge super quick. Not only does it enter with a counter, or 2 counters, or 3 counters, based on how many Hardened Scales and Winding Constrictors you have, but you can pay 1 and tap it to get another counter, or 2 counters, or 3 counters, so it can just grow way out of control super quickly, and then even if your opponent can kill it, you're going to get a whole bunch of Thopters to clog up the board, attack your opponent. Walking Ballista is actually kind of a combo piece in this deck. While it works out like Hangerback Walker when it enters the battlefield, if you play it for 2 mana, you get a 1/1, but that 1/1 comes in the form of a +1/+1 counter. But if you have a Hardened Scales, it would be 2 +1/+1 counters, etc., etc. You can pay 4 to put counters on it, but that's kind of the backup plan. The big thing is, what you're trying to do is take advantage of Arcbound Ravager, an affinity staple, but it works incredibly well with Walking Ballista and with the counter increasing effects. Basically, if you can get an Arcbound Ravager down, you can sack an artifact, like let's say an Arcbound Worker, and that's going to put a counter on Arcbound Ravager. Of course, that's 2 or 3 counters if you have the Hardened Scales and the Winding Constrictor, and then you can sack the Ravager to itself and put all those counters on Walking Ballista, and of course you're going to get extra counters thanks to the Hardened Scales and the Winding Constrictor. So in theory, you can get like 8 or 10 counters on your Walking Ballista, and then you can just remove all those counters and shoot your opponent down. Plus, Arcbound Ravager and Arcbound Worker just work really well with the Hardened Scales and the Winding Constrictor themselves. Arcbound Worker is 1 mana, you get a 1/1, but that power and toughness comes from a counter, so it's a 2/2 with a Hardened Scales, a 3/3 if you have both Scales and the Snake as well. So they just get really big. So you're kind of like this aggro deck that takes advantage of all these counter synergies, but also has this combo direct damage finish thanks to Walking Ballista and Arcbound Ravager. The rest of the counter synergies don't really work as well with the artifact theme, but they're still pretty good. Scavenging Ooze gives you some graveyard hit, gains you some life, and grows really big really fast. Instead of just getting a +1/+1 counter when you exile a card from a graveyard, you're going to get 2 counters or 3 counters from the Hardened Scales and the Snake. Dramoka's command, kind of the same thing. You can fizzle a burn spell, deal with an enchantment, kill one of your opponent's creatures, and you get a counter on something if you so choose, but that would be 2 or 3 counters because of how the deck is built. As far as the non-counter stuff, we get Dark Confidant, a bit of card advantage, another powerful 2-drop. Traverse the Uvenwald lets you tutor up your Snake, tutor up your combo finish with Arcbound Ravager and your Walking Ballista. Just a ton of flexibility, and since we have so many 0-mana artifact creatures, it's actually pretty easy to turn on a Traverse the Uvenwald, a fetch land, a Fatal Push, one of your Hangerback Walkers or Walking Ballistas in the graveyard. Then all of a sudden, you have Delirium and can tutor up anything you want. Fatal Push, just a great removal spell. It is really taking over Modern and really forging new archetypes all by itself. We're seeing a lot of interesting decks taking advantage of what's almost a 1-mana instant speed kill anything spell in the Modern format. In the mana base, Gavany Township is absurd in this deck. It puts a counter on everything, but that's 2 or 3 counters if you have the Snakes and the Hardened Scales. So it can grow your team. Vault of the Archangel lets you gain some life. And then we have a bunch of fetch lands. Blooming Marsh is a duel, some shock lands to search up, and a couple of basic lands. In the sideboard, Lingering Souls clogs up the air, great against control decks. Anafenza is another counter synergy in a weird way. When it attacks, you get to put a counter on another tap creature you control. Also just graveyard hate. Surgical Extraction, more direct graveyard hate. Thoughtseize to disrupt the opponent. Spellskite to protect your stuff. A Pithing Needle to shut down opposing planeswalkers or other non-creature effects. And that is Hardened Constrictor for Modern. And that's our instant deck for today. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And I will talk to you soon.